Alright, guys, happy month of Aviv or Abib, whatever version of pronunciation you use for this Jewish month. A couple days late, I'm recording about it because I kind of lost track of time with all my weird sleep patterns and everything. I've kind of just, I've fallen out of my routine for a couple days since the start of this week, mostly because of, having pre-workouts. The caffeine just keeps me up, so I think I slept alright last night, but the 2 nights before were kind of rocky, and but I got really good workouts both days, so sometimes, there's a little bit of that sacrifice in there. I don't really know exactly what I would title this. I guess I kind of want to talk about Passover, the Passover Seder, kind of like an intro to Passover without the details. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about this week's Parsha. Is it called Mitzorah? It kind of starts with this mention about Aaron's sons having died, and this kind of interesting detail about how they died. Now, you guys know I don't always stick to the Jewish Parsha. It's just something that it kind of is one way to study, but I wouldn't say I'm super diligent studying like every day. Like, I've missed days and weeks, but I try to, like, I think last week I don't think I read anything at all, but I try to kind of keep up with it somewhat, just because it just, I don't know, there's something about it that kind of helps me kind of recognize different parts of the year. I mean, this is maybe kind of like a different subject, but I know a lot of people say this. I say this a lot, time is flying, and I definitely noticed that, I'm like, it's April, it's almost May, and, it's like, I'm already calculating, like, okay, like, I gotta go to lunch today, how much money for that, starting a new job on Monday, how much money for the gas to get to and from these trainings in the valley for like 2 weeks, and, it's a lot. It's a lot to kind of, shift into this kind of newness of a new routine. It's going to take a while to kind of get a routine going. All of my wake times, sleep times, free time. I don't really know how it's going to go. But I kind of like, I don't know, I kind of like reading the Parsha. I don't always go through the commentary. I kind of do whatever, in all honesty. But let's talk a bit about Passover. Last night, I saw through the little openings in my curtains. I realized, that it was a full moon, and I was like, oh shoot, that means that there's got to be a holiday based on the lunar cycle. Now, I know Ramadan just ended, and then I think with the crescent moon, Eid starts for those. I think it's a couple days. I don't know. I'm still learning. And then yeah, Passover started, I guess, technically Monday sundown. So I wasn't aware of the lunar cycle at all on Monday. I was so absorbed in so many things. It was like it was nowhere near on my mind. I had like a pending kind of on Monday there was like this pending kind of anxiety provoking thing that I kind of wanted to get out of the way, and then realized I was going to have to wait till Tuesday to get that out of the way. And so I don't know, Monday I just was trying to like, you know, do my best to not fully spiral, and went to the gym and was just waiting for something to happen that didn't happen, and then it ended up okay, this situation was going to come up actually on Tuesday. So now it's started, over and done with. I don't have to deal with it anymore. Tuesday was yesterday, and it's Wednesday morning right now, and so that kind of consumed so much of my energy. It was just like life stuff. It had nothing to do with. It really wasn't a big deal, but you know, I do get anxiety about certain things, and just it was just it was something I was trying to avoid. So when I was kind of alerted to something that was supposed to be going on Monday, I was like, oh shoot, I thought that was supposed to be Tuesday, but the person who told me was wrong. And so I waited all the way till like a little after 8 p.m. Monday night, trying to get this situation kind of over with, but I was also kind of like avoiding it, like preferring to avoid it, but I was like, I can't like fully avoid this. So it really just took my energy, and I think that had me not really focused. Plus, like I said, I hadn't really slept too good the night before that, or um, the night of, like Monday night. I didn't sleep very good either, so it was kind of just I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. I kind of did. I kind of recorded an episode, and then I kind of took it down because I was like, oh, yeah, I don't really want to go into this. But it's really not as big of a deal. Like, it's just one of those responses, you know. Everybody who has anxiety, you kind of realize sometimes you realize, like I've realized, I'll put it that way, I've realized that this thing that I get anxiety about really isn't that big of a deal, but in my head it's always like a big deal before I've got to deal with it. And then just kind of the waiting and the anticipation, kind of like a negative anticipation, and just kind of like, I just want this to like start and end, like I just don't want to deal with this. And so it's kind of just something I have to deal with. There's not really any way around it, but it's something I think I kind of have to deal with. It's not something that I should avoid. Even though I could avoid it, I think it would not be wise. I'll put it that way. There would be maybe the comfort of not having the anxiety, but that would be all that I would get out of it, is not having anxiety around a certain situation that comes up every so often. But that really, I don't know, that's one thing that kind of threw my week. And it took a lot of my energy Monday. But I really don't know if I would have remembered that Passover was starting Monday night. I don't know if I would have remembered otherwise. Um, I was like a day off, um, and I never really fully committed to memory like the exact days. I just knew it was gonna start um, in like later in the month of April. And I checked on that a couple times, but I don't think I had checked the exact date. Um, but from Monday night, it goes a week long or 7 days long. Uh, Basically, it's a remembrance commemoration of the time period when the Israelites were taken out of Egypt, and what happened before that was the um, the plagues, and you know, the Israelites being enslaved in Egypt, and I don't know how they got enslaved. Oh my goodness. I didn't notice that my focus was turned off on my phone, so I got a call interrupting. But yeah, basically, who's calling me at like 8:09 in the morning? It was like a spam call. But anyways, in the book of Exodus, pretty much you'll find the original story of the Israelites. Um, I mean, if you've watched the movie The Prince of Egypt, and how, you know, Moses came to be in Egypt. I mean, I don't know all those details, but and there is some controversy around people saying that there's lack of evidence about the exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt. That there's not a lot of remains or, you know, archaeological evidence from that time of, you know, a mass amount of people leaving. But it basically took the plagues and Moses communicating back and forth between Pharaoh, whose family had raised him, I think at one point Moses kills somebody. Before they're let out of Egypt, kind of when he's finding, you know, I don't remember exactly in the Bible story like how he recognizes that he's not Egyptian, but I think it's just a really important point that a lot of times people don't realize, you know, Egypt is Africa, right? Or in the Bible, depending on what version, sometimes you'll see the word Nubia. Egypt is Africa. And if you even think about the culture in Egypt, compared to all the other cultures, such an interesting culture, you know, such I don't know, these mass world powers, Egypt was definitely a powerhouse. Um, it's just fascinating to think of the history. Like it's just, I mean, Egypt these days you don't really hear too much about Egypt, but you know, there's a lot there, and one of my friends had a really good question about Egypt. Like he mentioned, that you don't really see the pyramids mentioned in the Bible, but you see Egypt mentioned a lot. I mean, Egypt is mentioned, a lot in the Old Testament. You got Joseph, you got Moses, you got, I mean, I can't really think off the top of my head of more. But then you've got the New Testament. I mean, Jesus goes, Mary and Joseph go to Egypt. Jesus goes to Egypt. Like, people travel there, like, on a regular basis. And, I mean, I can't even imagine, like, what that would be like to travel from, Israel to Egypt. I mean, how far is that? And if you're kind of going, you're not flying. You're riding donkeys, camels, walking, and doing this for a festival. It's just interesting, because you don't hear about the Sphinx, the pyramids, like any of that, but it seems like it was a center where people went. Maybe they were escaping. I think they were escaping, right? With Jesus, like Mary and Joseph were escaping persecution, but wasn't there a census as well where they had to go to Egypt? I don't really know. I might be mixing up Jerusalem versus Egypt, but I don't know. I'd have to go back and like review all of that. But isn't it fascinating? It's just fascinating. I don't know. Egypt has always been like a fascination of mine. And when I took an African American history class with Dr. Parham, Dr. Thomas Parham at UCI, during my bachelor's, he's the one that I first heard about ancient Kemet from. Basically, this historical theory that Egypt wasn't white or Middle Eastern back then, but it was more so black or mixed with different races of people. They say this by looking at the artwork, and they say in history it's been hidden to make it seem like Egypt is just fully, Middle Eastern, brown, not black people, but Middle Eastern origin, which I don't really know. I don't really know. But there was this photo, how in, I think it's on Instagram where I've seen these, they have some footage, like old footage from like early video camera days. So it's motion footage. I don't think it has sound, but it's footage that they put in color. And there was, I don't know if I even saved this. There was this video, this clip of some old footage. I don't even know how long ago. It was old. And they said they'd put color to it. And it was supposed to be near the Western Wall, you know, area. It was like a region next to the Western Wall. And you could just see people walking back and forth. It was just mostly men. You didn't see any women, any children, I don't think. It was just men who were there. Like nowadays, when you look at the Western Wall, it's, for the most part, you see Jewish people there. You know, they're praying at the wall, the Wailing Wall, whatever the names are that people use. And it's usually Orthodox Jews, usually black hats, black suits. There's a women's section, but it's usually the men's section that you'll see footage of. And it's usually religious people dressed in black. And if not, it's, you know, other Jews wearing yarmulkes. I think if you're a visitor, you can go too. But just this whole, I mean, Islam has this separation of the genders as well. And when it comes to worship and other things, and you know that still is, that's in Judaism as well, and that's something that to me is maybe it kind of turns me away, not away, but like it makes me a little more hesitant to try to like understand or like explore, like to have to go to like a women's section, which is, I mean, I've been in church groups where they have like women's groups and stuff like that, but just the type of female I am, it just always feels weird because it's like I'm not like a typical female. I don't have the same typical ideas or interests. I mean, I'm not saying I'm male, I'm just saying I don't have, you know, whenever I went to like female groups and stuff, there was just stuff that I never really, I just didn't fully vibe with it. Not that I didn't like the events, it's hard to explain. But anyways, yeah, there was this video footage of these people walking by the wall, and to me, I was just surprised because I watched it a couple times, and I'm like, to me, these people look like dark-skinned African people. Not like, they look more like Habesha people. They kind of like, are Habesha people from Somalia or Ethiopia or Egypt? I don't know. But there's this group of people that they kind of have different features than a lot of African black people. Maybe the noses aren't as flat, or the lips aren't maybe as full, and the hair texture is like maybe a little more less, if you know what I say when I say kinky hair. Kinky hair is wavy while curly. Habesha people, their hair is more curly and glossy than you know, than other African people. I don't know if they're considered Middle Eastern or black. I don't really know, but they've got interesting features, and the people in these videos kind of looked more like that, but definitely darker than what I usually see when they show pictures of the wall. Usually it's Caucasian people, Ashkenazi Jewish people for the most part, other local Israeli people, and you know, I was talking to someone about this, not that specifically, just about race, and I know it's so controversial. I'm not even trying to get into that controversy, but it's, I mean, when you think about it, people say, okay, there is this theory that Africa is the seat of the world, that, you know, according to, the Abrahamic religions, the Garden of Eden was, you know, in that kind of region, North Africa region. I just don't know. Like, I've been playing with this idea of races, and how many generations does it take for certain races to not be Caucasian? I mean, to become Caucasian, mostly. For like, because a lot of times, I mean, living in the U.S. and there are Jewish people that are like Asian. There are different, all kinds of races of Jewish people. But for the most part, when you see Jewish people, the representation is usually more European looking, usually. Or you have the kind of Israeli, Middle Eastern looking person. But you don't typically have other racial representations, even though they do exist. But it's just a fascination of mine that it's like, if you have mixed family members, or know anybody who's mixed, black and white, I mean, if you think about it, it doesn't take that many generations for there not to be that much of a trace of black heritage. Maybe, so if I have a kid as a black person with a white guy, our kid is usually going to have, a lot of characteristics of both. So that would be, our, that first generation born. If you go into a second generation, if that person marries a Caucasian white person, has a kid, you probably might not know that, that the grandparents were, that there was a black grandparent. You might not know. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. It kind of just depends on the features. But usually the next generation after that, if you have more Caucasian marriage and offspring, or even if you don't have marriage, whatever it is, if you just have the offspring, you probably won't know at all that the great-grandparent was black. It's very unlikely. So by that fourth or so person, by the grandkid, you won't even know. And likely by the grandkid, you probably wouldn't really know for sure. There's this movie, oh man, it takes place in South Africa during apartheid, and people were categorized racially, and there was this, I don't know what it was called. It was like a chart that kind of showed like what generation are you still considered colored versus not colored. I mean, it's a whole thing. Like, I'm really not trying to go into some racial political thing. Like, it's just too complicated of a topic to try to talk about while talking about Passover. Like, it's not even like the same topic. But I just have this curiosity because I like to picture things in my mind, and I'm wondering, when I'm reading about Moses in Egypt, it's like, what did they look like? Because I know Hollywood has always presented a picture that it's always these like European looking people wandering around in the Bible, and it's like, well, with British accents and all that, it's like, or like that stage English, and it's like these people spoke Egyptian, right? Like Moses, when he was communicating to Pharaoh, wouldn't he have spoken Egyptian? He would have known the language, you know. I mean, he lived there, He would have known Egyptian, he would have known Hebrew. Um, I'm curious to know what is the Hebrew influence on Egyptian culture. What is the Israelite influence on Egyptian culture? And is the story of the Exodus documented anywhere else? And are there remains, archaeological remains or proof? Like people do say, the desert wipes away, historical things, but then also the desert preserves things. Like you have bog mummies and, the Dead Sea Scrolls, like the heat, can preserve a lot of things in the desert. So I don't really know. But anyways, they cross the Red Sea. They're wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. They eventually get to Mount Sinai, get a bunch of commandments, and after the 10 commandments, you kind of come into these other commandments. One of which talks about like the 3 festivals to observe in the first 7 days of the month of Aviv or Abib, from when the Israelites left Egypt. You're not supposed to have leavened bread during those times. I can't remember if that's a day when if you're not supposed to work during that period, but I know initially in the book of Exodus, somewhere after chapter 20, it mentions, not eating leavened bread for 7 days. And so, there is a Passover Seder as well. I don't know if I know the full history of the Passover Seder. The Seder, as is written, is, there's a tradition behind that, but it's not necessarily written out like that in the Bible. I don't know if it mentions things like hyssop and the egg and the lamb shank and all that. I can't remember if that's in the Bible. I'd have to go back and like look at that. But yeah, like Passover is just a very interesting thing. Right now I just have like thoughts about it. It's not really something I've gone into detail book-wise to like look into lately, just a little bit, but it's still got a fascinating aspect. And then, looking at this week's Parsha in Leviticus chapter 16, it starts out, talking about like Aaron's sons that had died, and I was like, when did they die? Because like I said, I don't read the full thing. So let's talk about this Parsha. I don't think there's any relevance to Passover necessarily. It's kind of talking more about, how to do these different offerings and things. How Aaron's supposed to do this and ways not to do it so that he doesn't end up dead like his sons. And I was just like, okay, I skipped some parts, so I'm like, where did they die? Where did they die in this story? Because I remember all these things about how to build all this and that and this and that. They're building this tabernacle tent, and they're building all these, utensils, and making all these tables and all this stuff. They're making everything from scratch, all the ingredients and all the types of wood you're supposed to use. And this is in the middle of the desert, so I'm always kind of like, how on earth are they getting all this stuff? Like, where are they getting all this wood? Where are they getting all these animals? Where are they getting all this oil? The olive oil, I read something about that. And I'm just like, were there olive trees? Like, I'm so ignorant, like, to the landscape, but I'm like, desert, I live in, California is a desert. I live in a desert. It's there's a lot of variety. So I wouldn't say you can't survive in a desert. Like, it's not like over 100 degrees out here, and I'm coastal, but it's, there's definitely a variety, but I don't know. Like, I don't know how they got all this stuff. They're traveling with it. It's all portable for the most part, and they've got people carrying it all around. And I guess Aaron's two sons earlier, they end up taking their censers and putting incense, lighting fire to them, putting incense on it. I don't know why they did that. I don't understand what that was. Like, what were they doing? Because there were specifications of what was supposed to be done, what offerings are considered, like where the incense is supposed to be lit, like on this mercy seat. It's not supposed to be lit on the censer. And then they died from that. It does say if somebody breaks that rule, they'll be cut off from their people. Does that mean killed? It said that it was an unholy offering, and they basically get killed. There's so much. There's so much just in these books that I just have no idea. Like, I watch a lot of these conspiracy sci-fi slash who knows if they're archaeologically sound or what, but some people have made some kind of reference to the Ark of the Covenant being some kind of conducting device, either for electricity or something. Like, they look at what's in it, what it's composed of, and say that it was some kind of like it conducted something, and when you think about all this stuff going on with the fire and all this other, there's just all this stuff happening, and all these animals, rams and goats and all these kind of things getting sacrificed all the time. I only know a little bit from what my dad's mentioned because he had a kind of business in Africa. I don't know if he's still doing it, but he had a business where he was breeding goats, and I think he said, I think it's by the third generation, they're pretty much in the high 90 percentage, which is considered purebred. And I think, I could be wrong on these numbers, I think he said, they reach maturity at around 3 months where they can breed again. I think that's what he said. Maybe it was 6 months. I don't know. I don't know anything about breeding animals. That is not a skill that I have. I'd have to look that up to see what actually goes on. But breeding of goats is something that he's, you know, he's dabbled in. And so I'm thinking, okay, if these people are in the desert, they've got all these animals. I mean, they've got to be breeding them. I mean, I got to put it this way. If you were a slave somewhere, you've got skills of some kind, right? Because you were doing forced labor. So different people know how to do different things. Um, and so I'm pretty sure there were people who knew how to breed animals. I mean, they were in Egypt doing it, and that's the desert. So they probably had some kind of skills, at least some of them, to know how to breed these animals. There were people that had skills of metalwork, of woodwork, of, like, they call it like the perfumers, like making perfumes. You know, the people who know how to make oils and make breads and all. Like, people knew how to do these skills. Not everybody knew every skill, but you probably had a craft, right, of some kind. Because if you were enslaved, you were doing something during slavery. You weren't just like kicking back, like chilling. You know, you were working all the time, and so you probably at least knew how to do one thing, if not multiple things. Um, you know, because that's how the labor, that's how things were created, is they were created by the slaves, right? Um, and that is something I notice about different nations, enslaving mass amounts of other people, um, you know, having human labor like that, um, is way more scalable. I mean, as a black person, I'm not like a fan of slavery, at all, but in all honesty, I get it. From an economic standpoint, I get it, but I don't agree. But I mean, slaves are an investment in a way too. I know this is not. I mean, the way I'm just wording it, I'm just trying to get the words out. I'm not trying to like it's an emotional topic, but I'm also just like, if you look at the facts, like even take I this is controversial too. Take the fact that China makes what high percentage of products that we buy in America, right? A very high percentage of things that you buy, especially once you start getting into discounted rates. China makes a bunch of our products, right? Are they being paid a livable wage, like with the people who live in these dorms and work at these factories? And like, I mean, they're not wealthy. Like, the workers aren't necessarily wealthy. Now, are they enslaved? I don't know. I worry about that because I have a speculation that there's some form of slavery going on, or just poor treatment of people. I don't think these factories are humanitarian sites, Um, it's labor, that they're making Nikes, they're sewing the sneakers, they're making the soles of the rubber, they're making iPhones, they're making all these devices and all these products that we buy. They're stitching them together. They do the electronics. They're skilled laborers doing these things, and they're getting paid a fraction of what they're getting sold for. But also, I mean, other than the sites where people live there and stuff, I mean, having people work for you, or even having them enslaved to you, it's an investment. Like, you have to feed them, or give them money, or give them benefits, or give them something, you know. I mean, slaves don't have a reputation for being treated fairly, unfortunately. That's not like a conversation that people usually have. It is usually seen along the lines of being unfair, but it is a part of history. And, when I think about the Israelites being enslaved in Egypt, I just kind of wonder what that looks like, because it's a nation of people enslaved that leaves all at once. They leave, you know, and then the soldiers are sent after them, and they cross, the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds or whatever sea it was, where Moses parts the sea, and they cross, and then they get across, and as Pharaoh's military is chasing after them, the waters close in and drown the chariots. And people have been looking for these chariots, and people have been looking for, you know, the Israelites for proof that they were in the desert. And I don't know if there are landmarks where they were at, you know. I mean, they were nomadic, they were traveling around. They were moving, they were on the move, and they have this thing, this reactor thing or whatever, that when people interact with it wrong, they get killed, either by the fire of God or whatever it is. This Ark of the Covenant is, it's pretty fascinating. And I know, I don't think Passover has a whole lot to do with all this. But it's just a weird, like, when I just kind of look just like in general of like the flow of the storyline of things, it's like I just get curious. It's like, what is happening here? Like, what is this? There's these people wandering around in the desert. They're multiplying. They seem to have success. Yeah, I mean, if you think of it, you took a whole enslaved nation of skilled people, a whole skilled people, just up and left into the middle of nowhere. But they're going to be able to sustain themselves because they have skills. And they basically built a portable lifestyle. And there's this whole religion and this whole practice of all these offerings and things, which I think in the Western world it's really hard for us to kind of understand the offerings. And I still struggle with like the sin offering and the burnt offering and the all these different offerings that are being placed, and like the fat and the legs and the blood and the where this needs to be dashed and put on these parts of the altar, and all of what's happening on these altars, and the people seeing that there's like some fire responding when the offering gets made, and it's like, I don't even know what this is. Like it always seems like such a simple storyline. It's like, oh, there's like these ancient people walking around in sheets in the middle of the desert, but part of me thinks they had a lot of knowledge, a lot of skill. Even in the economy, they're still using practices that are used today of outsourcing labor, having these different kind of systems. Like, I know looking at history, it's easy to think that, we're kind of taught that, like, oh, they were more backwards, we're more advanced now. But part of me really is beginning to think that, a lot of these ancient cultures were more advanced. Maybe they didn't have laptops or whatever, but they had something. Just the way it's documented is so confusing. It's like, because we don't know what it is. It's like they call it one thing, and then you're like, what is this? They were interacting with things, chariots with wheels of fire and all kind of stuff, where you're like, what? Like, people say it was aliens or whatever. This new Joe Rogan episode with Tucker Carlson talking about, aliens could potentially be some kind of a spiritual being, not necessarily some kind of a spiritual being that, or spiritual entity that's kind of like or at least some of them might be some spiritual entity that is on Earth that humans have been reacting with for pretty much all of human history. Almost every culture has some kind of alien type of thing, but back then, people weren't calling them like alien races coming from other planets. Like, there was some spiritual thing that was either from God or from their gods, or some kind of spiritual entity that was related to some religious practice usually, and that in modern day we kind of think about it differently or talk about it differently. And so that's a very interesting perspective I'd never heard before. But I wonder about some of these things, I wonder about this Ark of the Covenant. I wonder about the Exodus. They didn't have the Ark of the Covenant before they left Egypt. They had it when they made it. They built this thing. And it's like, it's just confusing, and even how like the pyramids aren't mentioned in the Bible, and today we're so fascinated with it, and it's like all these people in the Bible that go to Egypt and nobody mentions the pyramids. That's what my friend was saying, and I was like, when I thought of it, I was like, yeah, you're right. Nobody mentions it. And there's also these theories about, are these timelines even accurate? Like what we're taught. There's this. I think there's footage that one of my friends was talking about these like buildings, like certain buildings, the ones with the columns, and even in the United States, they have those buildings, and they're all over the world, and you see these buildings with these types of columns, and like how they were built, where they were built, when they were built, why do they always have the same structure to them, the dome and all that kind of stuff. Like, what is up with it? There's just so much that's like, even the stuff that seems like it has no meaning, sometimes it has more meaning. And then at the end of the day, we're forced to work so hard, and we just get in this practice of zoning out into our phone or into TikTok or Instagram or YouTube. For me, it's YouTube. And we don't sit and think about this stuff. It's kind of like, oh, these ancient stories of all these people. We know better now. Like, of course, we have learned things that are better now. But they clearly had things going on that, we can't even explain it today. Nobody can explain it, And there's not a lot of written history about things. We don't have the Library of Alexandria, which was in Egypt. There's a lot of ancient knowledge that's been lost. And, I do kind of like this blended thinking about what in modern day can we say is equivalent to some of this ancient stuff. Like, what in modern day do we see that could be an explanation? Not necessarily like to force God out of the picture or whatever, but like, some of this stuff is like, okay, they explain it that way, but what was it? Like, what actually was some of this stuff? It's very interesting, fascinating. I don't know if I really even know what to say about a lot of it. It's just a lot to think about. It's easy to kind of get away from not thinking about any of this stuff and thinking about the future and like AI and all this modern technology and stuff, and getting so absorbed in that. But sometimes, I really that's why I like the Bible and all these other things. It's just because there's this ancient kind of way of thinking in these different cultures, and just how they lived, how they got us up to the point where we're at now. you know, and just how things were different, also similar, but when you think of it, a lot of what we do isn't very different from how they did things. Like our economies are similar. We still have centers and hubs where people travel to, flock to. Maybe it's not always for like religious reasons, but you know, we have summer vacation, spring break, winter, where people go for the holidays and, you know, I mean, they had that kind of stuff too, back then. We have school systems and things that are kind of more based on, you know, ancient Mediterranean and European methods of learning, but I mean, that's been enforced pretty much around the world nowadays, but there are other methods of learning and studying, which is something I also appreciate about Jewish culture. It's just the different ways that people study religious texts. It's not. It's like a different method and different philosophies. I think I've rambled long enough for this morning. I'm gonna go eat breakfast. Um, but yeah, I don't know. A lot of food for thought.